Hello and welcome to ILTV's Israel Daily. I'm Aaron Porras, and coming up in today's newscast, ILTV looks into the foggy details behind Washington's decision to stall the reopening of its consulate for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. Meanwhile, former Prime Minister Netanyahu becoming a backseat driver to Israel's ongoing coronavirus response strategy. And finally, romance reportedly on the decline in the Holy Land. Depressing new statistics ahead of Israel's Valentine's Day equivalent, Tu B'Av. Action reported Thursday morning along Israel's northern borders for the second day this week, and again, both from Lebanon and Syria. First, a little after 1 in the morning, Syrian state news reporting that an alleged Israeli missile strike had been intercepted. Syrian air defenses activating over the Qusair region of the Homs province, and the targets reportedly Hezbollah military positions and weapons depots. But several missiles were shot down, preventing casualties and keeping damages to a minimum. This as opposed to the previous strikes attributed to Israel on Monday, in which 5 pro-Iran fighters, a military base, and a weapons depot in Aleppo were destroyed. Then the second incident Thursday morning occurring just about an hour later, IDF forces launching a 12-hour manhunt and eventually arresting 2 Lebanese men who had crossed the border into Israel. The suspects, however, were reportedly ruled out as potential terrorists. Rather, security forces believe the pair to be financially motivated, breaking across the blue line in search of work as Lebanon's dire economic and political crises worsen. Lebanon's government has been enduring years of instability, and the value of Lebanon's currency has fallen over 90% in just 2 years. In other news, the United States has announced that it's postponing the reopening of its consulate for the Palestinians in Jerusalem. This apparently at Israel's request, with Jerusalem asking the White House to wait until after Israel can pass a budget. That said, behind the scenes, Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is reportedly against the reopening of the mission being in Jerusalem outright, arguing that it flies in the face of the United States' recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital in 2019. And Bennett is far from alone. Likud MK and former Jerusalem Mayor Nir Barkat is proposing a bill that would bar all Palestinian consulates from sitting in Israel's capital. So what will become of these missions? Joining us to discuss is ILTV's Asaf Nissan. Asaf, thanks so much for being with us. Now, let's start with a little bit of background, actually. Why did the United States consulate to the PA close down in the first place?
So the consulate itself has been around ever since the 1800s, the 19th century, and was closed down in 2019 due to the Trump recognition of Jerusalem being the eternal capital of the Jewish nation.
All right, so why is Israel getting a supportive response, I should say, from the Biden administration with keeping this closed? Because it sounds like, as opposed to Trump, Biden has made several inroads towards coming back towards the Palestinians.
So the decision is much more, I would say, political than, I would say, diplomatic, because we're seeing this as a response for Biden's will not to give Netanyahu any chance to come back to power. He's trying to keep the Bennett and Lapid government intact and trying to give them the entire time they need to form themselves, to form a budget, to prepare themselves properly. And then we'll see post-budget decisions. We'll see the embassy, the mission might be reopening, and we're going to see a lot of pressure from the U.S. coming towards Israel.
So do you see maybe, again, with Bennett being opposed, as we can probably safely assume he is, how much pressure can he exert on the Biden administration? Are you telling me that it's irrelevant?
I can't say, because pressure could be on both sides. It could be from the opposition. It could be from factions in the coalition. At the end of the day, we can see a majority of MKs in the Knesset plenum deciding to vote against it. Despite the recent factions and fights between the coalition and the opposition, I think on a topic like this, we could see a unity between both factions and saying we're not going to want to reopen the mission to Jerusalem.
All right, well, seeing some unity would be very interesting. I'm very excited to see how that plays out. But I want to move now on to Nir Barkat, Knesset member from the Likud, Nir Barkat's initiative to completely block this and any other Palestinian mission possibly from reopening in Jerusalem. How would this draft law work exactly, and how much support does that have in the Knesset?
So the draft law would work in the fact that every mission that will be open in Jerusalem or will be open in Israel will have to be a mission for Israel, not just for the Palestinians. The fact of the matter is, every mission from now on will have to be supportive of both sides, because you cannot just be for the Palestinians anymore. That's what Barkat wants to offer. Now, as far as support, currently he doesn't have enough voices. He doesn't have enough support. We're seeing it because mostly going to get a lot of support from the opposition, but not completely. And the coalition itself is a little bit handled by itself. It handcuffed itself to the fact that it can't vote on it, because despite the fact that Yamina and New Hope would probably be for it, and maybe Blue and White, we still have half of the coalition will be against it.
All right, so my final question, how do you think these foreign nations will respond? Because many of them have missions to the Palestinian Authority.
It's hard to say, because a lot of them would maybe, if the law will pass one day, which potentially could happen, we might see it as a whole discussion, a whole opposition from those nations who won't agree to do for both, because in the end of the day, they still think the Palestinian people deserve their own attention. That being said, we can't be sure yet, because, again, the law currently won't pass, and as we see now, it could lead potentially to a struggle that won't end forever for Israel.
All right. Asaf Nissan, thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Now, it seems that former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is not quite used to his new role as the leader of the Knesset opposition. Netanyahu, apparently the government's backseat driver now, attempting to continue managing the coalition's coronavirus policy, but with neither the permission nor the authority to do so. Knesset opposition leader, Likud chief, and former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu reportedly speaking multiple times to the CEOs of Pfizer and Moderna in recent days. The conversations focusing on securing and promoting a third dose of the COVID vaccines for Israelis. Netanyahu discussing his dialogues in a Twitter video on Wednesday, saying that every day without such a booster shot is a hazard to Israeli citizens, particularly those over age 50.
זאת הדרך היחידה להגן על האוכלוסייה. הדרך היחידה לשמר את ההצלחה הגדולה שהשגנו בהוצאת ישראל ראשונה בעולם מהקורונה.
Netanyahu neglected, however, to notify Prime Minister Bennett or any other members of the coalition, neither before nor after these phone calls. And Health Minister Horowitz is repeating claims that Israel has more than enough vaccines in stock. Political analysts then arguing that Netanyahu is likely just trying to subvert the government and assert authority, as he's publicly sworn he would do. Meantime, the government also advancing a number of new COVID initiatives, including the reintroduction of the so-called Green Pass system. And most excitingly, the start of the clinical testing with Oravax by Oramed Pharmaceuticals. Oravax is a pill-form coronavirus vaccine now approved for trial at Tel Aviv's Sourasky Medical Center, and Israel will become the first country in the world to test an oral COVID vaccine, which, if successful, could eliminate the need for temperature-controlled transport and enable the world's most remote and vulnerable peoples to get vaxxed. Now, speaking of the nation's health, a newly proposed tax plan and aid package is looking to finally lower the costs of fresh produce here in Israel. The prices of fruit and vegetables alone being currently as much as 80% higher on average than in other Western nations. But here with the exciting details is economic consumer behavior expert and assistant professor Vili Abraham. Vili, thanks so much for being with us, of course. Now, what exactly are the details of the plan? Let's start that.
So we're talking about a new tax plan. Should it be approved, it will be part of the economic package. It'll be part of the budget of 2021, 2022. It includes cutting of custom duties, opening the sector to competition, which we really, really need this badly. If you look over the past summer, prices of fruits and vegetables were very, very high. Prohibitively high, in some cases $10 per kilo or even $30 per kilo if you look at cherries. Aid package and support to Israeli farmers, easing of regulation according to European standards. And the bottom line is that Israeli consumers will be saving all in all about $825 million a year, which, if you consider that there are 2.1 million families in Israel and you do the math, it's about $392 a year, which is more or less 100 shekels a month, which could make a big difference to many families.
Absolutely. So now, this figure of $820 million a year, is that a conservative estimate? Could it be much more than that? Or is that kind of a cap?
It looks like this is the cap right now, because when you're talking about a tax plan, then the finance ministry has to sit down and see how much this money will cost the government or how much money it will save. So this is what it looks like. I don't think it's a maximum or minimum. This is more or less the money that we'll be saving.
All right, so is this enough to offset some of the inflation and the costs that have resulted as a consequence of the coronavirus?
Yeah, well, because there will be more competition, the more competition, the lower the prices will be. It means that we'll be able to see more fruits and vegetables that are being imported because of lower customs. So the more the competition, the better to us Israelis, and we need competition not only in the fresh produce sector, but in many other sectors, because we really are overpaying if you compare to other OECD countries and to the Western world in general.
So what, or rather, what's standing in the way of this deal? What's still prohibiting it from advancing forward?
All right, so first of all, this has to be approved and it has to be balanced with the possible incomes in 21, 22, because this means that this costs the economy money. It's going to be, we're going to be losing 2.7 billion shekels. But on the other hand, the government is proposing taxes on other things, which probably will balance out the possible loss due to the support of farmers and reducing of customs. For example, if you look at taxing sugared or sweetened beverages, which is also on the table now.
All right, well, you've given us a lot to think about here. Thank you so much, Billy Abraham.
It was a pleasure.
All right, moving on now. A developing scandal as Ben & Jerry's Ice Cream Corporation could be facing brutal legal action after announcing that it'll be ending its partnership with its Israeli franchisee over the distribution of products to the quote-unquote occupied Palestinian territories, which includes parts of Jerusalem. This as Israeli and even the United States State Department officials are vowing to take action against BDS, and particularly in the 35 states that have already adopted anti-BDS legislation. So what can we expect going forwards? Joining me with more insights is CEO of the International Legal Forum, attorney Arsen Ostrovsky. Arsen, thanks so much for being with us. Now, will Israel really be able to inspire the United States government to stand against Ben & Jerry's and back these states' anti-BDS laws? The State Department has said that they oppose BDS, but they stopped short of providing details as to how specifically they would act on any of these policies.
Look, I mean, Israel very well may do that. Ultimately, it's the United States government, both federal and on state levels, who need to enforce their own laws and legislation in this case. I mean, what we have seen here is essentially Ben & Jerry's talking about social justice, but ultimately, this action is rooted in social injustice and anti-Semitism that is essentially full acquiescence to the racist BDS movement. Now, under US law, both federal and state, there are serious ramifications for such actions. On a federal level, there is possible criminal liability. On the state level, there is something like 30 plus states across the US now that have anti-BDS legislation, which could incur various punitive measures. That could be in the form of excluding both Ben & Jerry's and the parent company Unilever from a public governmental contract. It can also mean, and this could be far more consequential, it could require public pension funds in certain states, including Texas, including Florida, including New Jersey as well, requiring them to divest from Unilever, where they have investments in. So there are those kinds of actions that can be taken. There's also legal action that can be taken here in Israel, by the way, where it's against the law to discriminate against customers based on their geographic location. So there's multiple angles that can be taken. And ultimately, this will be not only legal action, but also require diplomatic means, political means, and also economic means as well to fight back.
So how many states will likely pursue legal action, and which states have used their anti-BDS laws already in the past?
Look, it remains to be seen. A number of states have already tried to enforce this. We have a clear example with Airbnb, and this is something that our organization, the International Legal Forum, was quite intimately involved with when Airbnb tried to discriminate against residents in Judea and Samaria. Legal action was started on a number of fronts, and in Florida, just one state, for example, threatened to take legal action against the company as well in order to enforce that. As for moving forward in this case, it remains to be seen. It's early days, that's for sure. but there are something like 30 plus states with very clear laws that prohibit any kind of tacit or otherwise support for BDS, whether that is based just purely on settlements or in Israel proper.
All right, now the State Department aside, and the federal government as well, how big of a priority is this truly? I mean, it's big to the Jewish and the pro-Israel community, but it doesn't necessarily have that much to do with politics in the West, does it?
Look, it's in many ways, look, the State Department, first of all, that they made very clear, and as has the Biden administration, that they are against the BDS, that they're against the whole campaign to boycott Israel and to single out and delegitimize Israel. They were very, very clear in their press conference yesterday about this. But this also speaks to a far broader, I think, issue that we're seeing today, including some elements in the far left progressive movements in the United States and elsewhere, using this issue really as an excuse in order to attack and to demonize and to delegitimize Israel. But the United States government has been very clear that they stand opposed to the BDS movement. I think that that's important to reiterate that that's something that's very much a bipartisan commitment.
All right, Arsen, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
And if you'd like to see my full interview with Arsen Ostrovsky, CEO of the International Legal Forum, please check it out online at ILTV.tv or on our YouTube and Facebook channels. Now on to something exciting. The 2020/2021 Tokyo Summer Olympics are finally here after being delayed due to the coronavirus pandemic. And Israel is heading off to compete in the Games with some familiar favorites and some fresh blood. Of course, with all the excitement is also some inspiring stories and a little bit of controversy. Here with more is ILTV's reporter, Chana Rifkin. Chana, are you excited? I'm excited.
So excited. This is such a refreshing moment after a year of COVID to finally have something to look forward to on a global scale.
All right, so tell me a little bit about this year's presentation, especially Israel's delegation.
Yeah, so this year we have the biggest delegation yet. We're sending 89 Olympians to compete. We have some returnees, including Linoy Ashram, the rhythmic gymnast, who has become very famous. She's won tons of competitions this year. We have Alexander Shatilov. He's a gymnast. He's a fourth-time returnee, I believe. Sagi Muki,
Yeah,
he's a judoka.
And he's recovering from an injury, actually.
Yeah. And he was also famous for becoming friends with his Iranian counterpart.
Yeah,
so that's exciting. Yeah. We have Ori Sasson, also a judoka. Yaakov Tumarkin, he's a swimmer. And Lona Chemtai Salpeter, she is a native of Kenya. I don't know.
A runner. Mm-hmm.
And a runner, yeah. And she married an Israeli, moved to Israel, and in 2016 she had to drop out due to some complications, but she's back and ready for action. Then we have some new blood. Peter Palchik, also a judoka. He's won a bunch of medals this year. Anastasia Gorbenko, she's only 17, and she's a swimmer. And she actually competed in the Youth Olympics. And last but not least, Artem Dolgopiat. He's an artistic gymnast, and actually he has a really great chance of winning a medal. So that's pretty good.
So let's talk about that. Who are our big chances right now? Who should we be putting our easy money on?
Yeah. So easy money.
Easy money.
Sagi Muki. He's expected to have a really great chance of winning gold. So that's really cool. Then we have Katie Spychikov. And for windsurfing, and Artem Dolgopiat for silver. They're expected to have a chance of winning silver. And Linoy Ashram for gymnastics and Toar Butbul in judo. Both are expected to win bronzes. So that's really cool.
All right, so we have like some first-time qualifiers, because I understand we have some new games actually as well in this year's Summer Olympics.
Yeah, so the baseball team for the first time is qualifying to go to the Olympics, which is really cool. This is the first time that Israel is sending their baseball team.
It's like a big chunk of our delegation too. It's like 20-something.
Yeah, it's a full team.
Out of the 89.
It's a full team. It's really great. And then we have archery competing for the first time, surfing, and for swimming, this is the first time we're competing in a 10-kilometer open water marathon, and equestrian, which is really interesting and cool.
All right, well, horseback riding, super awesome, but swimming 10K, I can't even imagine. All right, so Now, I know that Tokyo, of course, is the scene of the Olympics this year, but they've actually had a fair share of controversies, including one that just broke this morning.
Yeah. So a comedian named Kentaro Kobayashi, he was the opening ceremony show director. So he was fired because a video resurfaced from 1998 of a skit with a Holocaust theme. Obviously looks really bad. It was him and his comedic partner at the time. They were acting as children TV entertainers, and they were figuring out what kind of game they could play that had to do with paper. And then they came up with a paper doll game, to which he said, like the ones from the time you said, let's play Holocaust. And then he made some kind of joke about the TV producer being upset about a Holocaust-themed game. So it's pretty bad, but he apologized.
All right, well, we're all very excited. There's a lot controversies aside, let's leave that alone. There's a lot to be excited about these games, which start tomorrow and they end August 8th.
Right.
We're very excited, and Chana, you're going to be back with us.
I'm going to be back.
Updates.
We're gonna keep you abreast on all things Olympics. We're going to highlight different Olympians as they compete. It's going to be fun.
Now, on a related note, for the first time ever, Israel has actually been chosen to host this year's annual Miss Universe pageant. The competition is set to take place in Eilat this coming December. And Chana Rifkin rejoining me with the rest. Chana, give me the details so far.
Yeah, okay, so this year we're celebrating 70 years of the competition, and it's going to be taking place in Eilat, like you said, in December. So what we know right now is that Steve Harvey is returning as the host. Everyone loves Steve Harvey.
Hey, how can you not?
How can you not? And of course, the reigning Miss Universe, Andrea Meza of Mexico, is going to crown the successor. Other than that, there's not really any more details yet, but we'll keep you updated as they turn out.
Right, so any final thoughts?
Well, I mean, organizers and the Tourism Ministry of Israel, they're looking forward to this as kind of an ending to the coronavirus period. They're hoping that this will signify the end. And they're urging people to get vaccinated so they can participate. So that's...
Makes sense.
Yeah.
All right, well, I'm excited. I mean, it's not a competition I've ever watched, but I think I'm going to now.
I mean, it's in Israel, so why wouldn't you?
Chana Rifkin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right, now, the minor Jewish holiday and Israeli equivalent to Valentine's Day, Tu B'Av, starts tomorrow, Friday, July 23. But according to reports by Israel's Central Bureau of Statistics, it seems that fewer Israelis than ever will be celebrating. This, as the report published on Wednesday, reveals a sharp drop in the number of marriages and a sharp incline in the number of single men and women in recent years. In fact, among the Jewish population, for one, the data shows that from 1970 to 2019, the number of single men aged 45 to 49 has risen from 3 to 13%, and single women of the same age range rising from 2% to 11%. Then, as for the younger crowds, aged 25 to 29 over the same time period, the change is even more dramatic. The number of single men in this group doubling to 63%, and single women more than tripling to 48%. Meanwhile, it's likely no surprise then that the average age of marriage across demographics likewise rising by about 2.5 to 3.5 years, the new average age being 27.3 years old among men and 24.9 among women. Finally, not all romance on the decline, though, the CBS finding that the number of unmarried couples who are, however, living together has steadily actually been on the rise. All right, and finally, before we go, it's time to learn some Hebrew with the latest of our limited weekly lessons from our friends at Ulpan O.
סליחה, בן, מאיפה הוא?
הוא מקנדה.
וואלה. ומאיפה היא?
היא גם מקנדה.
ומאיפה אתה, בן? אתה גם מקנדה?
לא, מה פתאום? אני מישראל.
סבבה.
All right, that is it for today's news. Today's exchange rate is 3.27 shekels to the American dollar and 2.61 shekels to the Canadian dollar. Finally, for the latest updates and news from ILTV, please like ILTV on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, as well as to our newsletter at iltv.tv. I'm Aaron Porras. Be well. Thank you so much for watching.